Okay, let's get the party started. So ostensibly I'm here to talk about making your own Jackbox games. This is my very simple roadmap. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can make it, and then at the end I'm going to get a little existential. So, what are we doing here? This is just a little bit of tone setting. So, we'll get some prompt engineering in the next talk, which is great, so I can defer those questions. But we are making real-time collaborative AI party games. So this image, or collage, I hope, encapsulates some of the aesthetics. It's preparation for what's to come. So, check. Huh? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to run through a couple of games that I made and just describe what they are so that you have a bit of grounding for the folks who haven't played Jackbox games, and also just to get a sense of how they're a little bit different. So the very first one is called Far Sketched. It is a game that came out of sharing AI-generated images with friends back and forth and realizing that was fun. And so everybody generates an image at the beginning. They type it in a prompt box and hit go. And then someone's image comes up, and everyone's looking at their image, and they're like, what even is this? And everyone gets a chance to write an alternate prompt to describe the image. And afterwards, everyone sees all of the things that everyone else wrote, and they're trying to guess what the actual prompt is. So if you've played Jackbox games, this is very similar to the format of Fibbage, where you're sort of trying to determine what's real or what's not. In this case, the ground truth is which thing actually made that image by being a prompt to the AI image generator. So if you've read the prompts here, you can try to see if your guess is correct. Hold it in your mind. There was the answer. All right, so you can take this game, and if you take it and you put it in the realm of a language model instead of an image model, you can make a bunch of different versions, one of which is trace emojis, where you can effectively ask ChatGPT to give you 3 emojis given a topic. And it'll come back, and then everyone does the same thing, where they write prompts to fool one another, and then they see all of them. I'll let you imagine what this came from. Totally different style of game. So getting back to the theme of trying to understand the AI's truth functions, this game is about figuring out how ChatGPT thinks about the world. So everybody comes up with a question. We show one person's question at a time, and then everyone's going to write an answer to that question. And ChatGPT is actually going to pick the answer. So we can ask ChatGPT what the best audience question might be, and then ChatGPT would go and pick. Now you can get points 2 different ways in this game. One is by writing an answer which it will pick, and the other is by, after everyone's written their answers, you try to guess which one it will pick. So the environment here is one in which people are prompting and trying to imagine how the AI is going to respond to arbitrary questions. Of course, ChatGPT wants to understand how the AI works. You can also make an AI cult simulator. You can also make a game where 2 people have a conversation, and at some point they're separated, and an AI, ChatGPT in this case, is given the transcript of the conversation and tries to fill in the role of the other person to each person. And the first person to notice that they are talking to the robot and not to their friend is the winner. Of course, if you try to call that early and you're still talking to your friend, you lose. So you have these games about trying to both impersonate the AI and decode whether or not someone else is impersonating the AI or the AI is impersonating them. Okay, so those are the base games. We can also remix these in a bunch of different ways. For example, the emoji one, instead of making emojis out of ChatGPT, we can have it say write haikus. So we could get a haiku like this, and then everyone tries to write a prompt that could have generated it and then figure out what the actual prompt might have been. So if you're trying to guess what the actual prompt is, it was AI Bob Ross. Similarly, with the trying to understand ChatGPT's world model or truth function, we can make it a simulation of other kinds of minds by prompting it. And the prompt engineering talk after this. If you want to ask questions, ask there. But you can tell ChatGPT to like put on different hats and pretend to be different things. So we could say, hey ChatGPT, you are AI Bob Ross. Now we're going to ask the question, what's the best audience question to have? And it turns out that ChatGPT pretending to be AI Bob Ross has different opinions than if it's not pretending. And it wants to know why we made these games. We can have it simulate anything. It's just all in the prompting. So you can get a whole bunch of variety here. You can start to think about how the AI is modeling the world and what kinds of truth functions you can get out of it. Again, the premise here is that you are feeding it a multiple choice question and it's just getting back a letter, and then we're showing which letter it picked and awarding points to the players. Okay, so that's what the games are, the general feel of them. The tech part of the talk here is how we make it. So this is going to be a little bit high level, but hopefully with enough details that if you wanted to go and take a crack at it yourself, you'd have a place to get started. So I did this all by myself. I have a couple of principles that I follow. I've been playing around with web stuff for a while. Leverage other people's technology. Trying to make stuff yourself is going to slow you way down. So I shamelessly just try to offload as much work as I can to the things that people have already done. Abstracting only the things which are necessary rather than prematurely abstracting and thinking that you have an understanding of your problem. I have caught myself doing this way too many times. And what I've discovered is that when I try making things with a bunch of hacks first and then look for the commonalities later, I end up finding the patterns that I actually want, and it makes me faster in the long term. And then the last is just try to make it super simple. Cut features, make it really lean, focus on the core question. In this case, it's a game. My core question is this fun? And when I wanted to ask that the first time with the initial image generation game, I think I had my prototype within like 48 hours to be able to play with some people and be like, is this worth making any further? And then as bug-ridden and janky and whatever as it was, I was able to get at that question, and we played for a couple of hours even though we kept hitting problems and data load issues and whatever. So it's not to say go and try to make buggy code, but like if the thing that you're making doesn't actually do something useful, then like invest as little time in it as possible and then you can move on. At least that's how I approach it. Okay, so getting a little bit more into these, I said leveraging existing technologies. For me, this is a web game. There were basically two choices here: which reactive front end to pick and which back end to pick. And my feature set here was basically I wanted something reactive, and I wanted something for the back end that would handle auth for me, that would do pub/sub, yada yada. Abstracting the essential parts. So I started with just one game and then made another game and made another game. And then at some point I was like, okay, what are the patterns here that I know I'm going to be using going forward? And what are the things that I want to be able to have incredibly custom for each one? And so I'm going to show you a diagram which basically encapsulates my entire architectural knowledge about these games, and it's very simple. We have clients. We have a server. All the clients are allowed to do is to pass messages. The server's job is to take those messages and the current game state, reduce it, turn it into a new game state, which syncs down to the clients, and the clients all render it. Now, there are a couple of choices here, and those choices are about the simplicity for me. So the simple version of that diagram looks like a few things. One, the client rendering is basically pure. It means that if you do a fresh page load for a given game and you know what room you're in, that game state should just render. This means that you don't have to persist any state on the client. You don't have stateful components. You don't have to remember anything. You just keep syncing. It grabs all the data from the back end and it displays it. Super simple. Similarly, on the back end, that game state reducer that takes the messages and the game state, transforms the game state, and puts a new game state, again, pure and also idempotent. So that means that if the clients and their networking, they like hit a button multiple times, send messages multiple times, whatever, hit a button, refresh, hit a button again, the backend should not care, right? So this is like a simplifying assumption, and it's a design constraint that ends up making the thing very simple when you're actually doing the application logic. And then the last thing is having shared types at the API boundary is just, I love it. I am so glad that I'm not living like 10 years ago, that we have TypeScript, that we have like, anyway, it's a great world. So the way that I did this was that I was using TypeScript for everything. I recently shared a thing in the DevX Discord about getting this set up with a Python web server and a TypeScript client, basically using OpenAPI spec to generate the things so that you have shared types. If you're ever doing any web app development, I strongly encourage this pattern. So what do we get from this? So for all of these games, we have things that are shared and things that are separate. The shared things are, if you've ever played a Jackbox game, everyone's going to join a room, everyone's going to be taking actions, so that messaging, the sync of getting the data from the backend and rendering it, and then also calling the AI, so calling ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion or whatever other APIs we want. Now the things that are distinct are for each game, we have one game state and reducer for it. So that's basically that game's engine, right? So the state of a game might be getting prompts for images or displaying images or voting on prompts, whatever, right? But that's always custom per game. You similarly have a custom renderer for each game. So that's going to be like showing the image, showing the text box to be able to type things in, whatever. And it turns out that once you set up all this shared stuff and you have some patterns for like hooking new games into it, you can prototype stuff super fast. And we'll get into a little bit about how, given the technologies that we have, the reactive front ends, the full-powered back ends, the technological angle to being able to make these things is not really the limiting reagent in being able to make things. Well, I'll get to that later. Whole bunch of other details. These things are all just sort of nits, and if you're curious about really going and making something like this and you want to ask me questions, I'll happily go into any amount of detail you want. But these things all just sort of fall out of those design patterns. And if you want, you can go check out the source code. So it's all open. I released it to the public domain. You can go and launch it yourself as you like. So why do this? Why did you make these games, as we know that the ChatGPT's rendition of AI Bob Ross would like to know? Or more existentially, why make anything? So I said that it was easy technologically to do these things. We have a lot of leverage and a lot of tools. It's like you can do a lot with very, very little now. From my talk last month or a month or so ago, like being able to have LLMs write the code for you is becoming more and more possible. So one of the real innovations, I think, is actually being able to connect with why you are even doing the thing that you're doing, or at least this has been something that's important for me. And that ultimately ends up looking like an aesthetic exercise or a presentation of value, which also looks something like a spiritual pursuit. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the driving forces of these games and why I think it was an important thing to do, why it was a project that I invested several months of my life into and, released and I'm talking about. So getting at the aesthetics, right? Like AI Bob Ross, that initial collage, the silly haiku, all these things, I find that being able to present context for absurd play is actually like a necessary thing for us culturally. I find that social games where we're interacting around these things, I was introducing these games to people back a couple months after ChatGPT launched. And being able to socialize what the things were and weren't capable of doing in a way that was social and where people could sort of vent the experience of novelty was something that I found at the time a social good. I also am big into just like free-form creativity, and I find that being able to open-endedly prompt these things with absolutely no goal is just, you end up taking them to places that you wouldn't. So that very first image that I showed for one of the games with like the newspaper and the dudes at a desk, it's not the kind of image that you get if you're going and trying to make like a product image or something like that out of Stable Diffusion or DALL-E. It's something that you get when you're making things that have no reason to exist. And when you do that, you actually learn a lot more about the models and what they are or aren't capable of, because it's much higher exploration. And then the last thing is that when we're interacting with these things in a social context, it's actually an educational one, because as everyone's exploring through that creative, open-ended play kind of environment, you have a whole bunch of knowledge acquisition that's happening implicitly. People aren't even thinking about it, but it's an educational environment. On that last point, I wanted to say a little bit about learning environments and things that we can think about as technology evolves. So this is a learning environment, right? We all gather here to be able to like learn from one another and to like keep up with the times and to like see the different things that are coming out of the technological landscape. Now these things are happening really fast. I remember last time I got a question that was about prompt engineering, and now we're going to have a talk about prompt engineering today. But one of the things that I said about it at the time was that like there aren't books on this thing. And so in general, in these super fast-paced environments, we don't have rigorous literature about them. And actually, the culture creation around these things is where the knowledge is. And so it's in these communities. If you go into the subreddits that are doing like automatic 1111 stable diffusion stuff, it's like they understand the capabilities of the image generating models in ways that like very few people do, because they're all doing it together in a dense and fast iteration loop. So it's to say that when you're playing these games in a group, you can uncover things that like we just literally don't have literature around. Going back to the creativity thing and the creative liberation and being able to put anything inside of those text boxes, and it being a game rather than like I'm trying to write this report or make an image for this product or this thing, it's just like there's no purpose to it. And that actually makes, again, for more exploration. And the way that I think about this is toys, not tools. So if you came to my talk last time, the little painting app, I wouldn't want to make into a commercial tool where it's like taking these AI-generated brushes, because the pressures on that environment would make it such that it can't actually achieve the goals that I'm interested in with it. And I think the goals of the toy are actually foundational to us building new understandings of what the technology can do. And then finally, as you imagine that these AI-generated like code tools and whatnot get so high leverage that we can like put in our thoughts and get things out, the how, all that part of the talk where I'm talking about like the architectural decisions and like, you know, you're in the weeds of actually coding the thing, that stuff starts to be unimportant. And the reason that you are doing it is core to the fuel of like anything that you produce. And so this is to say that it becomes much less about the external results and products and much more about the internal state of the creators and what they're looking to do and express through the thing that they're making. So I would love to hear from all of you, maybe after the talks, what kinds of things you'll make and why you'll make them. There's the website. If you guys want to play the games, maybe we can do it afterwards. Thank you so much.
Okay. Do we have time for questions? Would you? Yeah. Anyone have any questions? One in the back. Here you go.
Thank you. That was great. It's a bit of a speculative question, but it made me wonder, like, how long do you think until like Nintendo comes out with an NPC that is like ChatGPT qualities in it in the game, something like that, you know?
Oh, I wish I could. I wish my mental models were good enough to understand what Nintendo will or won't do. That seems like valuable information. I think we're in this funny transitionary phase where the things aren't yet reliable enough and they're still so costly that we haven't seen those kinds of like sort of more polished real life deployments. I think both as model compute cost goes down, right? More compressed models and like more architectures that are distributed that will run the things, right? If Nintendo came out with a system that had specialized hardware to be able to run the thing and like shipped with models. And the other thing is the reliability. And what I don't think we understand very well the kinds of contexts that we can interact with these, say, language models in a way that is satisfying and makes sense. Going back to the like interpretive context problem, as we start to figure out that, I think we'll understand much better what that NPC looks like or how it behaves in relation to the players.
Cool. Question over here.
I don't need a microphone.
Oh, it's for the people that live stream.
Okay, sure, yes. Hello, my name is Tahar, and what kind of resonated with me was purpose, and if this gaming can trigger normal behavior inputs, and the output is that data can be extrapolated for a purpose. I know you're not there yet, but in the early stages, could the gaming be where folks are just naturally responding to whatever, you can build the whatever, and the goal would be, or the outcome goal would be, learning behaviors on a global scale. And then that data would be very important to folks who are in e-commerce, or they're into research around health, just to understand, can that be a leverage point of this, or is that's too far ahead of what this could be?
Thanks for the question. I don't think I would be comfortable giving the data out of these games to other parties.
Facebook would.
Thank you. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yes.
Quick question, just to clarify, for the backend, did you use any backend framework, or you use like backend as a service?
Yeah, so I was using Firebase. I guess I skipped that slide pretty quickly. On the open source slide, my current tech stack is Preact for the front end and Firebase for the back end, all in TypeScript.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Question in the back here.
And just curious, database, was it Firestore or real-time database?
I use the real-time one because these games, you want fast sync between the players. So it's like everyone types in their alternate prompt and then you want to immediately be able to refresh everyone's screen. You can do that a bunch of different ways. The RTDB was a nice way to have latency be low.
Any other questions? I know I had one question. Of all the games you made, which one are you most proud of? And also, is it demoable?
So we can demo. I think we could also just play afterwards. Like basically everyone can play from their phone. So if you get a group of say 4 or 5 people together and everyone gets onto the site on their phone, pop open a room and just start playing.
You could probably do that as like a session afterwards. That would be a lot of fun. What would you say is your favorite game that you made right now?
Currently I'm fond of the quiz game, mostly because it's an interesting thing to check back in on as the LLMs get sort of redeployed and with like different versions. And so it's a way to keep up with the kinds of things that they think are likely. So I still don't have great mental models of how, say, ChatGPT would pick between the different options in the quiz game, but I can tell you that they are different than it was a year ago, or a year and a half ago when I first made them. And I think that has to do with like what ChatGPT itself finds as likely strings of tokens. And I'm very curious as I explore that a little bit more, understand its world modeling in a capacity that I think the next generation of interpretive contexts is actually using the AIs as interpreters for their own outputs in rigorous ways, but I don't quite know what that looks like yet.
Very cool. Very interesting. Okay. Well, any other questions from the audience? Okay. Well, let's thank George for his talk. Really appreciate it.